Welcome back. You're watching One on One. We're talking to the rock star economist, Jeffrey Sachs, and pleasure to talk with you about the work you're doing. You've obviously been asked to do some amazing things, going to countries and try to fix their systems. I mean, quite a daunting task. But for you, what have been the key moments in your career? What are the ones that stand out as highlights?
Well, I think the decisive, lucky moment for me was July 9, 1985, if I got the date exactly right, which was the moment that I walked down the ladder from the airplane arriving in La Paz, Bolivia, where I had been asked by some former students to come try to help them figure out how to end what was at that point about a 40,000% per year hyperinflation. And this was, I was at the time 30 years old and was a tenured professor at Harvard and thought I knew a lot and, okay, what can I do to help? And what I learned the moment I stepped off of the plane was how much I had to learn about the world out there that I hadn't learned from the textbooks. And it began for me this 20 years plus of work in advising countries. Fortunately, I knew enough to be helpful back then, and the hyperinflation did end. And watching what I had so much hoped in my life that the tools of economics would be useful, could really contribute, and seeing how that could be put to practice was, for me, definitely a defining moment.
When you deal with world leaders, they're asking you for advice, but of course you're often prescribing a painful medicine. How do you persuade them to listen?
Well, I actually believe economics is not just pain, although there is the reality of what are the resources available. And I try to ease the pain because the rich world has so much wealth that if there is suffering, there's always some more help that can and should come from the comfortable and the rich to enable the poor or the suffering or the unstable to get out of their misery. I don't believe in just wagging a finger or giving a lecture. From the first days when I was in Bolivia, I said, yes, there are tough things that are going to have to be done within Bolivia, but the rich world should cancel the debt of Bolivia. Now, that was back in 1985. That was a kind of heretical idea at the time. I was about the only academic in America saying those things, and I was even warned by colleagues, some of our trustees might not like this very much from the financial community. And I had tenure, so I could say what I really believed. And John Maynard Keynes had said these debts have to be canceled back in 1919. And he was, in my sense, in my feeling, giving support and accuracy to these arguments. So it's not just selling pain. Economics doesn't have to be pain. It should be solutions. Part of the solutions are that the rich have to help the poor. This is a fundamental truth. If the rich just leave the poor to suffer, not only will crises not get solved, but they will boomerang. And this is something that the rich in general have a hard time understanding. And that's the news that I've been trying to teach also for more than 20 years.
What do you recall as the most frustrating moments in your career?
Well, without question, it was my experience in Russia. I had been an advisor to the Polish government in 1989 at this incredible democratic revolution in Eastern Europe. And I had not just a front row seat, I was all of a sudden part of the strategy making of economic transformation because the solidarity movement, which led to the democracy, which led Poland's return to Europe, which led the revolution of 1989, didn't really have an economic strategy for what to do with this moribund, debt-ridden, downward spiraling communist economy, how to make it a functioning market economy. So they did ask me, and I was privileged to work with the leading Polish freedom fighters, as it were, the ones that led the revolution. It worked with some duress. Poland made a remarkable transformation. It achieved economic growth. It did get into the European Union. Well, Boris Yeltsin and President Gorbachev and their advisors were watching the Polish experience and asked me to get involved. And I did at the end of 1991. And I served as an advisor to the Russian government for 2 utterly frustrating years. Very, very tough. I always felt, I couldn't quite convey it to others, I always felt like I was in the middle of a hurricane, shouting at the top of my lungs, but no one was listening or hearing or cared. It was just so many tumultuous events as the Soviet Union collapsed. So that was a very frustrating period for me. I think that the United States really misplayed those events, and I think we still have consequences from the fact that the U.S. government continued to view the newborn Russia as an adversary rather than as a country to help. And I think it was a bit self-fulfilling that a lot of things didn't work out because the U.S. government, this was the Bush senior administration at the time, didn't really get in there to provide the kind of help that was needed.
Your most recent book has caused waves in economic circles and is received by the general public too, The End of Poverty. What makes you so confident that such a major task can be achieved in our lifetimes? I think that's one of the key things you stress. We can achieve it in our lifetimes.
We're uniquely the first generation on the planet that could see to the end of extreme poverty if we choose to do so. It's amazing. You know, most of history, most people were extremely poor. So it's only in the last couple of hundred years that science and technology has enabled the world's population to escape from the bare bones existence. And that's the real source of optimism, the science, the technology, the know-how, the fact that most of the world, maybe 5/6 of the world, even if they're not well off, are not in extreme poverty. But 1 out of 6 people on the planet, heavily concentrated in Africa, but also in Asia and parts of Latin America, are still stuck right at the bottom. Now, we ought to be able to find ways, and you can identify the steps, the ways that other parts of the world got out of extreme poverty, the ways that the rich world could help the poor world to get out of poverty.
So the expression, the rich are getting rich and the poor are getting poorer, richer are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, isn't actually quite true, is it?
No, it is a simplification, and it's actually not at all right when you think about what's happening in Asia right now. This is by far the most important economic transformation in decades. Maybe it'll prove to be true in centuries, because Asia, which is more than half of the world's population after all, was impoverished by and large 50 years ago. But now India, starting with dramatic economic progress, China, a boom like we've never seen in history, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Thailand, of course Singapore, and so forth. This is a change of profound importance, and it shows that the poor can get rich also. But it doesn't mean that it's automatic, and the poorest of the poor in Africa, they're not moving ahead right now. That's a downward spiral.
A little earlier you said sound bites and phrases, I guess, and buzzwords would be included are important. So tell me about bed nets. Bed nets are now the buzzword I'm hearing in the community.
A bed net, when it's treated with insecticide, protects a child from malaria. But the people that have it are impoverished almost by definition. And so they can't afford the medicines or the bed nets that could save them and get them healthy and get them productive. So for many years I've been saying, let's just get the bed nets to everybody. Stop trying to sell the bed nets to people that have no money. Let's get the medicines out to the villages. If we do this, this is one of the keys that will unlock the poverty trap that grips Africa right now. The whole cost of that would be less than 0.1% of the income of the rich world. What does that mean? It means that for less than 10 cents out of every $100 of income, 10 cents out of $100 of income of the United States and Europe and Japan, if you took that money and mobilized public health in Africa, we'd be saving millions of lives. Could we afford it? Well, we squander so much more in war, violence, Pentagon spending. It's incredible what we waste our money on and what we don't invest our money in.
I know you often quote how much the US spends on military in I think a day and a half, for example, or a couple of days, could actually solve a lot of the problems.
Let me tell you the frustration. I spent a lot of time with the White House this past year saying, you've got to do something about malaria. They said, okay, we're going to do something about malaria. They finally came up with what they called an expanded program against malaria. I had said you should do $1 billion a year for 5 years. What they came up with was 1.2 billion over 5 years. In other words, divided into 5 years. No, come on. 1.2 billion is less than we spend in 1 day in the Pentagon. And that's what we're going to do for the United States of America for 5 years for malaria? That's a shame.
Now, you've put out some strong messages. How would you like to be remembered? What would you think your legacy would be?
Well, I'd of course like to see the Millennium Development Goals met by the year 2015, and I hope I'm around to see the success that in 2020 I expect to be. I'm planning to be to see the success in 2025 that we are in a world that has ended extreme poverty.
Jeffrey Sachs, wish you a lot of luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.